It's always so rainy here. It's a wonder my house doesn't float away. I suppose then I could do you a few more story times from the water, as my house floats down the river. Either way, welcome again to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. So good to have you here today. Always good to have you here on, any day, I suppose. We are all searching for peace. We're all searching for absolution in our own way. But sometimes it's the peace we find in certain places that really means the most. Sometimes, however, that peace turns out to be a lie, especially if you're seeking your peace in the blue. I opened the mailbox and started shifting the mail around to see what today's bunch of crap was. Bill, credit card offer. My hand froze as I looked at the envelope, my jaw quivering a little as I read the address on the front and the name of the sender. This hadn't happened in years, not since I'd left college, but I'd felt safe enough to settle somewhere, hoping that the letters had stopped. It had been 3 years since she'd written, but it made me feel like I was a teenager again, fearing that anyone but me would find those letters. From Catherine Mansley to Justin Mansley. Dear brother, it's been so long. You should come see me in the blue. Love, Catherine. I tore the letter up and went back inside, trying not to notice how the paper had made my fingers feel clammy and moist. The envelope, too, had been the same way, moist and difficult to hold. It was like wet paper that had dried badly, but it was always that way. When Catherine sent me letters, they were always like that. I had kept them at first, hiding them so no one would find them, but I burned them now, not wanting them anywhere near me. I picked up the phone to call Daniel, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried to call my uncle, but Uncle Mike was hoping I had seen Daniel. He said he'd been missing for a week now, and everyone was getting worried. I can hear him calling me now as I sit on the floor with my knees against my chest, trying not to hyperventilate. But I know it's useless. That feeling is the closest I can come to drowning, the closest I can come to understanding why Catherine writes these letters. Daniel, Carter, Clint, Henry, they're all gone now. I'm the last one that Catherine hasn't got. When we were kids, or early teens, we would all stay at Grandpa's cabin over the summer. Grandpa was long dead, Grandma too, but the cabin was always called such. My mom and dad would usually come up first to get it ready, and I loved the time before my cousins got there, the times I could just enjoy the cabin. I haven't been back in years, not since we went back for Clint, but I can still remember the cabin. It was more of a lodge than a cabin, and Dad claimed that Grandpa's dad, our great-grandpa, had built it by hand. It was made from the huge old trees in the area, and it had a big area downstairs with 4 rooms above it. The rooms were easily as big as hotel rooms, the Motel 6 kind, and they held our family and the families of my cousins easily. Dad had a brother, Uncle Mike, and a sister, Aunt Claire, and both of them had 2 kids. Catherine was the only girl in the family, other than Aunt Claire, and the youngest. That meant she tried extra hard to keep up with her older cousins, and it often led her to trouble. The time she fell out of a tree and broke her arm, the time she'd bruised her legs and butt jumping her bike over a 15-foot drop, the time she'd nearly drowned at Carfer's Pond, were all times she was trying to keep up with us. We were merciless, too, giving her no quarter and it must have been miserable for her. We loved to hike and swim and spend time in the cabin, but the thing we all looked forward to seeing the most when we came out here was the blue. The blue was a hole in the woods, more like a pit than anything, with water inside that was perfectly blue, like the stuff inside the jar where the barber keeps his combs. It went 30 feet into the earth, the precipice sheer and easy to stumble into if you weren't paying attention. The water inside was so blue that it hurt your eyes if you looked at it for too long, and it always looked artificial to me. Someone had hung a bridge over it, a rickety thing that swung across on ropes, and my cousins and I thought it was great fun to go and tempt fate by bouncing on it and making it sway. Thinking about that now makes me downright shudder, but all kids think they're immortal. I was 12 when it happened, but it could have happened before then easily. We'd been at the cabin a week, swimming and fishing and generally enjoying our time in the woods, when Clint said he wanted to go see the blue today. He said it quietly because if he had said it any louder, his mom or my mom would have heard, and that would have been the end of it. All the adults knew about the blue and had forbidden us to go anywhere near it. Dad had told us stories about playing on that bridge when he and Uncle Mike were kids, but Aunt Claire had always been too scared to go on that rickety old thing. I think my dad knew that we were going to go out to the blue, probably expected it, and never expressly forbid us to go there, unlike my mom. He knew that forbidding it would just make it more enticing, and if he let us get it out of our systems, the blue would become boring, all on its own. I don't think he believed something tragic would happen, but if he had, he might have kept a closer eye on us. We told our mothers we were going on a hike, Uncle Mike, Uncle Dale, and Dad having gone fishing that morning, and they said that was fine, but to be back by lunchtime. We made our way out as quietly as possible, thinking ourselves clever for not letting Catherine hear us, but no sooner had we jumped off the back porch than here she came with a "wait for me." Clint grumbled that we should just run off without her, but that was when my mom poked her head out and told us not to forget Cat. Catherine seemed pretty pleased with herself as she followed us out of the yard, and as we hiked towards the blue, she realized where we were going. "We can't go there," she said, looking scandalous. "Mommy said it was off limits." "Well, Mommy isn't here," said Daniel, "so if you don't want to come, then turn around and go back." Catherine seemed to think about it, but must have decided it was too far to walk back on her own. We were about 2 miles into the woods, and despite her desire to follow us everywhere, Catherine was kind of a scaredy cat. She didn't like being by herself, and it usually led to her getting hurt when she tried to follow us into dangerous situations. She still followed us, but suddenly she was a safe distance away as we made our way towards the blue. When the trees parted and the edges of the pit opened up, we knew we had arrived. "There it is," Clint breathed, the lip coming into view not long after. "So cool." We had seen it a dozen times, but it was always awe-inspiring. The hole was like something punched by a meteor, the edges jagged and uneven. Maybe there was a meteor at the bottom. Maybe it was what made the water so blue, but we had never seen it. Well, not yet. We were only really interested in the bridge that day and cared nothing for the natural beauty. We spent the first few minutes just leaning over the edge and spitting into the water below. We couldn't see when it hit, but we knew it had. If the side had crumbled, we'd have all gone in. Then this story might have been very different. "Let's go on the bridge," one of them said. I think it was Clint, but could have been any of them. It was definitely Carter who agreed, but we all wanted to go. The bridge was what we lived for, the thrill we came back for, and the second my hands touched the ropes of that swinging death trap, I felt the adrenaline begin to pump within me. The bridge was in disrepair from the first time we found it, and it had only gotten worse over the years. It was missing a few boards, the ropes frayed and peeling, and we should have known it was only a matter of time before there was a problem. When we got to the bridge, all of us crowding onto it as we usually did, Henry moved to the front and began swinging it from side to side. The ropes creaked as we all laughed and held on. Henry was quite a bit larger than most of us, and when he rocked the bridge, he really rocked the bridge. It swayed wide over the gap, and we all laughed and joked as we swayed along with it. We'd been cheating death for a couple of minutes when we realized that someone was missing. We looked back towards the lip of the pit and saw Catherine hunkered in the woods. She was miserable, not liking the sight of us trying to throw ourselves into the blue, and didn't seem to want any part of it. We joked and picked at her, but I wish now that I had seen the fear in her eyes and thought better of what we were doing. I should have been a better big brother on that day. "Come on, Cat," Clint said. "No way," Catherine said, grabbing one of the trees like we might try to pull her onto the bridge. "Don't be a scaredy cat," Clint sing-songed, repeating the phrase scaredy cat, again and again as the rest of us picked it up. I didn't pick it up till the last, but I chanted it right along with the rest of them. Catherine was clearly on the verge of tears, but she still had her pride. She stomped over to the bridge, as indignant as anyone could be at 6, but as she came to the edge, she started to look unsure again. Her hands shook as she reached for the ropes, and when Henry stepped out of the way, she walked hesitantly onto the rickety boards of the bridge. Henry closed off her retreat, and she stepped closer to our group as she tried her best not to cry. "All right, Henry, let's get some big swings in this time," Clint trumpeted. Henry seemed all too willing to oblige, and soon the bridge was rocking farther than I'd ever seen it rock before. It was swinging over the blue like a pendulum, and even I was afraid that we might go in. It was pivoting back and forth, the ropes groaning like a ship's mast in a high wind, and I wondered for a moment what it would be like to fall into that blue water. You could only really tread water for so long before you went under, and I wondered how long that would be. Would anyone get back with help before you drowned? I didn't see when Catherine fell off the bridge, but when Henry yelled out a moment later, I looked over and saw her when she hit the blue. She didn't splash, the water just stayed put, and she came up thrashing as she tried to get her head above the crystal blue water. The water must have been thick because she was really struggling to make headway in it. She was calling for help with big, gasping breaths. The bridge had stopped moving, all 5 of us looking down into the chasm and knowing that we were in trouble. We'd been playing where we shouldn't. We had been being stupid, and now someone had gotten hurt. "We've got to go get help," Daniel yelled, and his words were like a starter pistol. I ran for the cabin to try to get help, Daniel and Carter coming with me. I prayed Catherine could tread water while we ran the 20 or so minutes back to the cabin, but I knew that Catherine wasn't a strong swimmer. I didn't expect she would still be treading water by the time we got back, but I prayed to God that she would be. Mom, Aunt Claire, and Aunt Liz were at the table when we ran in, drinking tea and laughing, but they jumped up when we told them what had happened. Mom came running when she heard, grabbing a rope and running along behind us as we went back. My dad and uncle still weren't back from fishing, but Aunt Liz said that she would call emergency services to hopefully get someone down there. The run back took a little longer, all of us winded from the sprint to the cabin, but Catherine had only been in the water for 45 minutes by the time we got back. That wasn't so long, I thought. She could be fine. It turned out it was 45 minutes too long, though. Clint said that she'd gone under about 5 minutes after we'd left, and she hadn't come back up. My mom tied the rope off to a tree, but it was too short to make it down into the blue. She went back for another rope, my aunt staying with us, and by the time she got back, she had emergency services in tow. They brought long ropes and divers, and soon they were in the blue, trying to find her. The diver who went in said the blue was miles deep, and the water was like trying to swim in jello. They went as deep as they dared, but they never found Catherine. My dad and uncles came back from fishing to find my mother inconsolable and Catherine presumed dead. They didn't have the heart to punish us for what had happened, and all of us said it had been a terrible accident. We left out the part where we'd been rocking the bridge, and they decided that Catherine must have lost her balance and fallen in. They shouted a little that they had told us to stay away from the blue, but they could see how shaken up we were by what had happened. They thought we had been punished enough, but it appeared that something else disagreed. We never went back to Grandpa's cabin again. It held bad memories for the three of us, and I don't think any of Dad's siblings went back either. None of my cousins went there willingly again. It held terrible memories for all of us, it seemed, and I think they knew something dark was waiting for us to come back. The first letter showed up 2 weeks after Catherine's funeral. The 2 weeks after we buried my sister were a really bad time for me. I was sad about what had happened to Catherine, but I was also unbelievably riddled with guilt over it. I felt that I had every right to be guilty. I'd played a part in what had happened, but I didn't think I'd been the biggest part. Looking back, my cousins were really the ones that had pushed her to get on the bridge, but I hadn't stood up and tried to protect her either. I'd failed in my duties as a big brother, and she had paid the price. My parents had been talking about back-to-school shopping, something they seemed unwilling to do, and my mother was trying to guilt my father into getting it done. They were both distraught over the loss of Catherine, but my mother had always been a bit of a realist when it came to things. My sister was dead, but I would still have to go to school whether I wanted to or not, and I would need things to begin school with. While they were arguing about it, Mom told me to go get the mail, see if the circular had come in. I think she wanted coupons out of it, but I can't really remember. I would find it hard to remember much about that day when I looked back, except for the letter. I went to the mailbox and found that there was a circular in there. There were also 2 bills, a couple of condolence cards, and a letter in a strange envelope. The envelope felt moist, the paper seeming damp and moldy, and I didn't like to touch it. I started to sandwich it between the condolence cards, and that's when I noticed it had my name on it. From Catherine to Justin Mansley. I felt the other pieces of mail slip from my fingers when I read the name. It couldn't be. Catherine was dead, dragged into the blue by whatever lay below, and there was no way that this letter could be from her. I thought it might be a trick, maybe one of my cousins, but they had all seemed as guilty about what happened to Catherine as I was. Clint hid it behind a constant stream of humor, but he still clearly felt like he needed to hide what he'd done. Like me, he realized that he could get in trouble if they knew that he'd been goofing around, and I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to try to pull something like this. I opened the strange envelope. I didn't want to. I wanted to throw it away, but I had to know what was inside. Even at 12, I knew there was no way it could be from Catherine. Dead people didn't send letters to the living, but I still had to know what was going on. The letter was brief. All of Catherine's letters have been brief. It's your fault. You should be the one in the blue. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the letter. I started to rip it up, thinking again that this was a cruel joke, but something stopped me. It isn't something I can really explain, but tearing that paper felt like tearing pages out of the Bible. It felt fundamentally wrong, and I ended up stuffing it in my pocket instead, as I collected up the mail that I had dropped on the pavement. I couldn't destroy it, but I didn't want my parents to find it either. What would they say if they saw it? Would they know what I'd done? I couldn't risk that. I was in enough turmoil over my sister's death without my parents blaming me for it. I came in and dropped off the mail, sneaking up to my room as I hid the letter in a box of baseball cards under my bed. wouldn't be the only one soon enough. Over the next 2 months, I got 2 more letters, each on the same day of the month. After the second one, coming about 2 weeks after school started, I started checking the mail every day to make sure the letters didn't get picked up by my parents. I hid them in the same box, each of them reading similar to the one before it. I'm lonely. I miss you. It's your fault. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. It was October, the leaves already a vibrant orange in the front yard, when Clint called me after I received my third letter. "Are you doing this?" he asked, sounding angry and scared. Sounded like he was shaking something in the background, paper or something, and I asked what he was talking about. "These letters. Carter and I have each gotten 3. If this is you, then you need to stop. We all feel bad about what happened to Catherine, me especially, but this is going to get us in trouble. If one of our parents found those letters, then we could be in serious trouble for what we did. Your sister is gone, man. I'm sorry for it, but this isn't going to bring her back." I knew what he was talking about without having to be told. I told him I'd been receiving them too, and I bet Henry and Daniel had been getting them as well. I still didn't think they were from Catherine. There was no way for dead people to write you letters, but somebody clearly knew what we had done in the woods. Clint said that was impossible. We had been the only ones in the woods that day, or at least the only ones around the blue when Catherine had fallen in. He said it had to be one of us, and before he hung up, he was going to call Daniel to see if he was the one playing bad jokes. He called me back 20 minutes later and said they were just as freaked out as he was. He says he's been dreaming about the blue, and he knows that Henry has too. Henry's talking about the blue a lot these days, and Daniel is scared he's going to tell somebody what really happened. I hadn't thought of that either, but I suppose by then I thought it might be what we deserved. The letters kept coming on the same day of every month, and I realized that it was the same day that Catherine had gone into the blue. We all received our letters on the anniversary of her fall, and as Christmas came around, we all started to worry about Henry. Henry had always been a big boy, looking like a high schooler, even though he was only a year younger than Daniel. But when he came to our house for Christmas, he looked like he'd lost 30 pounds. It also looked like he might be pulling out his hair. He was twitchy, quiet, nothing like the boisterous boy we had seen a few months ago. Daniel told us that when he talked, it was about the blue. He said he dreamed about it, drew pictures of it, and in the pictures, Catherine was floating in it. Henry and Clint had been the last ones to see her alive in all that blue, but in the pictures, she was waving at them from the water. He says in his dreams, she comes out of the blue and tries to get him to jump in. She told him that it's nice down there, it's cool and wonderful, that he would really enjoy it if he were to come join her. He keeps talking about joining her, but I don't know how he would. Dad told Mom that we were never going back to that cabin, not after what happened. They're all really afraid that one of us will fall off that bridge if we went back, Daniel told us as we sat around the kids' table in the den. Henry sat at the table with us, but he did little more than move his fork around in his mashed potatoes, not really eating anything. A couple of months later, my aunt and uncle put Henry in a psychiatric facility. Dad told us he was sick, but Daniel said he'd started having night terrors, and he almost completely stopped eating. He couldn't go to school. He wouldn't play. It was like he just shut down completely. Daniel was afraid to sleep in the same room with him, and he really hoped that whatever this place was they had taken Henry to, that they could fix him. A month after that, Henry broke out of that facility and was never seen again. No one was quite sure how he had gotten out without being seen, but Henry was gone. Everything in the room was exactly the way it had been the night before, including the restraints that were still buckled in the same way they had been when the orderly put him to bed. The police thought for sure that they would find him walking along the road or something, maybe in the woods around the place, but they never did. Uncle Mike and Aunt Liz were devastated, but the four of us were pretty sure we knew where Henry was. They'd never find him, just like they never found Catherine. We were all pretty sure he was in the blue. The facility they put him in was about 30 miles from Grandpa's cabin, but we were still certain that that's where he was. When I got my letter that month, all my questions were answered. Henry came to join me in the blue. You should come and see him. He's much better now. Daniel and Clint called me later that day, and I told them I'd gotten the same news. What are we going to do? Clint asked. I didn't have an answer. Carter went next, though it took him 2 years to do it. Carter was about 2 years younger than Clint, the youngest of the cousins besides Catherine, and he held out only because he and Clint were so close. I don't think Clint's parents ever had any inkling of what was going on with their son, but by Thanksgiving, he was looking the same way Henry had. He was barely eating, and only then because Clint coaxed him. Clint had changed a lot since that summer when we lost Catherine. He had softened a little, and I think he had realized that life was a little more fleeting than he had believed. He said Carter wasn't sleeping, was having nightmares about the blue, and told Clint that Henry was in the dreams too now. Carter was smarter than the rest of us, not that that was saying much, but I think it helped him put off the bad feelings and get through it for a while. Unlike Henry, Carter just looked tired all the time, and when he came to my 14th birthday party that year, the bags under his eyes looked like bruises. It's not as bad as it looks, he told me with a faint smile. My parents sent me to a doctor to get some meds that help. Well, not really help, but they let me sleep. They make it harder to get out of the dreams, though. I asked him about the dreams, and despite Clint telling me not to make him think about them, Carter said he didn't mind. Daniel and I sat close, like students listening to a lecture, and Carter reeled a bit as he thought about them, not seeming sure how to begin. I'm standing on the bridge. It's nighttime. It's always nighttime in the dreams, and I'm looking down into the blue. It's... He blinked really fast for a few seconds and shook his head before going on. It's glowing in the dreams. It's always glowing. As I stand and look down, Catherine and Henry come up out of the water and wave at me. They tell me to jump. They tell me to join them. They tell me how great it is down there. As they tell me, I kinda wanna jump. His eyes shut for a count of 5 before he jerks awake with a start. I want to go to them. There's no dreams in the blue, no nightmares or letters or anything. It's just peaceful. He leaned over onto Clint and started snoring, and Clint accepted his weight gratefully. Carter nearly made it to my 15th birthday party, and a lot of that was due to Clint. This whole thing brought us all closer together, and we called each other often. Daniel actually came to live with us for a while, his parents having trouble coping with Henry's disappearance. Aunt Liz was eventually put into the same facility that Henry had escaped from after she tried to overdose on sleeping pills, and Uncle Mike soon moved in with us too. He and Daniel looked sad most of the time, but I think they enjoyed having us close. Daniel had started having the dreams a lot more often, but he was 15 and starting high school, and he had other things to occupy his mind. If there was anyone who could have used our help, it was Clint. Clint had started high school too. He and Daniel were a year older than me, but he missed a lot of days while he tried to take care of Carter. Carter was losing his mind at an alarming rate, and Clint confided that he had started strapping him into bed at night. I caught him sleepwalking to the front door, and he fights me when I try to get him back to bed. I don't know how my mom and dad haven't noticed yet, but I may have to tell them soon. He's like a zombie, and I don't know how he makes it through school every day. A week before my 15th birthday, Aunt Claire called to tell us that Carter and Clint had gone missing. They both disappeared in the middle of the night, she said tearfully. I just don't know what to do. The police have no idea, but I'm hoping that maybe they'd gone to your house for some reason and they were safe. My mom said they hadn't, but she and Dad said they would help her look for them. Clint's bike is gone, too. I told Dale that Indian Scout was a bad idea, but he swore Clint was responsible and that he wouldn't just up and leave without telling us. Daniel and I were eavesdropping, and he said we both knew where he'd gone. After my parents left to join the search party, we piled into Daniel's Jeep and went to Grandpa's cabin, as little as we wanted to. Uncle Mike had left him the Jeep when he got his driver's license, but this would be the longest trip we had ever made in it. Grandpa's cabin was about 2 hours from my house, and despite having left a note, I was sure my mother would be worried sick. The drive seemed to take forever, and when we pulled up in front of the cabin, we found Clint's motorcycle out front, and we knew what we would find. It was dark when we got to the Blue, and Clint was kneeling on the ground as if praying. The dirt beneath his forehead had turned to mud, and he didn't even look up when we approached. I didn't catch him in time, he said through tears. I didn't wake up until the sun was nearly up. By then it was too late. He beat me here by minutes. I don't know how. I tried to catch him, but he was already standing on the edge when I got here. I begged him to come back, but he just pitched over and went into the Blue. He was right, he said, pointing. It glows at night. I hadn't even noticed, but as I looked up, I could see it now. The Blue was glowing like the iridescent moss you sometimes found in caves. And as I looked down, I thought I saw 3 people swimming down there. They were looking up at me, but I leaned away before they could entice me over. Clint, Daniel said. Clint, we need to go. Go? Clint asked, not seeming sure what he was talking about. Yeah, we need to go. It's too late for Carter, but your mother's worried sick about you. Aunt Claire thinks you and your brother have been kidnapped. Maybe even that the same people got you who got Henry. Let's go back. Let's go back before something happens. Something already happened, Clint said, his voice husky. Carter's gone. Henry's gone. And I'm tired of living with these dreams every night. They aren't going to stop until we all go in. And I'm tired of fighting it. What are you? Daniel started, but Clint had stood up and sprinted for the lip of the drop before we could stop him. Daniel made a grab for him, but missed completely. We both stepped after him, trying to catch him, but he was over the edge before we could even process what was happening. He didn't splash when he went in, just like Catherine hadn't, and Daniel and I stood there breathing heavily as we watched the still surface of the Blue. When he didn't surface, we walked back to the cabin with only the moon to guide us, and called our parents. Emergency services came in to dive in the Blue again, but Daniel and I just sat there in shock. We've got to get some distance from this, Daniel said. Maybe if we go where she can't find us, the dreams will stop and we can avoid the same fate as the others did. I asked him if he believed that, and all he could say was it was worth a shot. They sold the cabin after that. My Aunt Claire and Uncle Dale had lost both their kids in one night, and they took it pretty hard. Daniel and I helped each other through the next few years, but when Daniel graduated and said he was taking a job overseas, I could tell that the dreams were starting to get to him. I'd kept my grades up, using the sleepless nights to study, and was eligible for early graduation. I'd been accepted into a college 3 states away, something that broke my mother's heart. Daniel wished me luck. For the next 3 years, we just kind of maintained. The dreams got better with distance, and soon I stopped having them altogether. Daniel told me the same and built a life for himself in South America. After 3 years, I almost forgot about the dreams and the Blue, just chalking it up to something remembered wrong from childhood. And as I got closer and closer to graduation, I couldn't wait to start my new life. Then Aunt Liz died, and Uncle Mike had begged Daniel to come back. Aunt Liz had died of a stroke in her bed, having left the facility years ago. And Uncle Mike was a mess. He had never really gotten over the loss of Henry, and he begged Daniel to come back and help him. Daniel had agreed to come back and help with the funeral preparations, but then he said he had to go back. He invited Uncle Mike to come back with him, saying he could stay with him in South America, but he doubted that he would. So only for a couple of weeks, a month tops. I'll be fine, he assured me. Now, he was gone too. As I sit on the floor typing this out, I can hear something I haven't in 3 years. The blue is calling again. Catherine is calling again. I don't know how long I can hold out. Sooner or later, I'll go join the rest of them. Sooner or later, I'll return to the blue. The old guilt is still there. It's always been there. I was a fool to think I could run from it. I should have saved myself the trouble and jumped in the night Clint went in. Now, I'm the last. It's only a matter of time before Catherine gets me, too. I think one of life's simple joys is sitting with a cup of coffee around a fire and telling stories. Don't you? We've all had hardships in our childhood. Maybe you had an abusive parent. Maybe you had a bully at school. Maybe you grew up a little poor. But let's hope your childhood trauma isn't quite as bad as the subject of our next story. After all, he was abducted at a very young age. When I was 8, I was abducted for about an hour. I know that's an odd statement, but trust me when I say, it gets weirder. When I was 8, a man abducted me right off the street. My parents and I lived in a shabby apartment about a block from my primary school. Since Mom worked days and Dad worked nights, I was responsible for getting myself to and from school since I was 6. I walked the same way home every day, and if someone was trying to snatch me, it wouldn't have been hard to learn my routine. So there I was, walking to school with my Power Rangers book bag swinging off my shoulder, thinking of nothing more pressing than the math test I hadn't studied for the night before. Suddenly, a white van rolled close enough to ruffle my hair with the side mirror of the van. Then a hand caught the handle at the top of my book bag and pulled me in. I struggled as the meaty hand lifted me into the passenger seat, but he pulled me up with little effort. He reached over and shut the door, his arm crossing right in front of my face. This would have been my opportunity to bite or kick or fight in some way before the van rolled on again. I found myself unable to react, though, frozen by the ease at which I had been lifted from the street. As we moved away from the curb, I glanced at my abductor as he sat behind the wheel. It's funny how your mind always creates a picture of a potential abductor. When the teacher talks about the strangers in school, I always picture a man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that covers his face, a soft voice with a gentle nature. On all the TV shows I wasn't allowed to watch but did, child molesters were always these casual business types with vans full of candy and sweet smiles. This guy, however, looked nothing like the guys on TV. The man sitting next to me was large, gray, and scary looking. He looked more like the prisoners on the TV shows I watched when no one was paying attention. He had long, greasy hair that was graying in odd places, muscular arms connected to a barrel chest barely contained by his dirty sweater, and a pair of eyes that looked 1,000 miles away as he piloted the van on its course. I became terrified that I would never see my parents again, that I would never see my toys again, and that my parents wouldn't have anything to remember me by except the school picture I'd brought home last week. It's funny sometimes, the things kids worry about. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not gonna hurt you," the guy said in a gravelly voice full of mucus. I stiffened in my seat. How do you know my name? That was a stupid question. The man had probably been stalking me for weeks before making his move. He knew my name, he knew my parents' names, he knew my address, he knew the kids I played with at recess, and what time I took my first poop every morning. He had stalked me like a hunter stalks a deer, and now it was time to move in for the kill. Because I am you. That took me by surprise. I had expected many things. I had thought maybe he'd say he was in love with me, to scream at me that he would kill me, so I'd be scared so he could get off on my fear. Maybe even that he would keep me forever, that he'd be my new dad, or I'd be his new son. I hadn't expected him to say that he was me. "What do you mean?" I asked, visibly confused. He stared straight ahead, seemingly unable to begin. I thought again about how he was probably going to hurt me and leave me in the woods somewhere after he'd killed me. That was what the killers always did on unsolved mysteries after they killed someone. I bet he had a shovel or something in the back. My 8-year-old mind could already see him carrying my limp body off into the forest to bury me in an unmarked grave. The dogs would come sniffing after me at some point, and they'd unearth a perfect little skeleton in a hole in the woods. My parents would cry and scream, just like the parents did on TV, and Robert Stack would ask the viewers to call if they had any information. It's funny, the places a kid's mind goes when he's in panic. "This is hard, kid. Now that I'm here, I don't know how to start." We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he found his words. "So, in 40 years, humanity cracks the secret to time travel." He paused again, unsure how to continue, before finally settling into a rhythm. "By the time they do, you will have spent 20 years of your mandatory 2 life sentences in prison." I turned to look at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Prison? Why am I in prison?" He sighed, fishing a cigarette out of the cup holder, where he had several sitting loose. He pressed the lighter on the dashboard and put the cigarette in his mouth as he waited for it to pop again. "We've done some things we aren't proud of, Mark. We acted in haste, and now we have to contemplate at leisure. Let's just say that you took the easy way out one too many times, and finally, it came back to bite you. The old neighborhood claims us all eventually, Mark. You're living in a septic tank, and it's only a matter of time before you get pulled down into the shit." The lighter popped, making me jump, and he yanked it out and pressed the tip to the cigarette. He inhaled and turned back to look at me. "We don't have much time. Someone noticed me take you off the street. At least they did last time. And the cops are going to pull me over in about 10 minutes. You have to stop this from happening. You can't let the old neighborhood claim you like it always does. There are bad people there. People that will be responsible for your downfall. You have to get as far away from them as you can. You have to get away and never look back. If you stay, you'll be forever damned. Get out, Mark. Get out and live." The cigarette jittered in his lips. He was shaking me then, yelling into my face, shaking me as the cigarette's red end swam back and forth in his mouth. I felt my head getting fuzzy as he shook me, and when the red light started flashing, I thought it might be from all the shaking. He stopped then, turning to look back at the lights, and reached into his pocket to pull out a gleaming piece of steel. It was a gun, a big gun, and when he stepped out of the car and leveled it at the policeman, they seemed afraid. They weren't afraid when they shot him, though. They yelled at me when I climbed out of the driver's door, but I didn't care. I held his hand as he lay dying, his face turning to look at me. I could see that half his cheek was missing. His sweater was turning the color of autumn leaves, and when he spoke, it was gurgly and wet. He coughed a bright spray of blood onto my shirt, and I still remember how it stood out against the bright yellow as the cops came running towards me. "Get out, Mark. Get out before it's too..." By the time they got there, he was dead. My parents arrived shortly after I got to the police station. Mom hugged me, crying, and Dad wrapped himself clumsily around me as well. It was the first time in months that I could remember seeing them together. As they folded me into their embrace, I remember thinking that everything was going to be okay. I could avoid the scary man's prophecy and prevent the terrible fate that he was trying to warn me about. How naive I was then. That night, Mom and Dad had a terrible fight. Mom wanted to leave the neighborhood. She wanted us to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, until we could find a different place. She didn't feel safe here, not in a place where people just got picked up off the street and nearly kidnapped in broad daylight. Dad wouldn't hear of it. He had lived here his whole life. This was where his work was. She was crazy. Maybe she could just get another job somewhere, but he wasn't about to throw away 10 years on the job because she was scared. As I lay in bed, I realized that everything wasn't just going to be okay. I clutched my stuffed Ninja Turtle tightly as they continued to rage at each other in the living room. The next day, Mom came to talk to me. It was decided that Mom and I would stay with my grandparents for a while. It was also decided that Dad would stay at the apartment. A little while turned into the next 10 years of my life. My parents got divorced a year after we went to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. I went to see him a few times, but Mom usually insisted that he come to us. When I did go to see him, she came with me. She still didn't trust the old neighborhood, and the few times I went back, I saw that it had gotten worse. Gangs and drugs had taken over, and Dad had become a stranger to me. When the construction company he had been with for so long closed down, he joined the element around him. Mom wouldn't tell me what he was doing, but I'm sure he was making drugs. The next time I saw him, he looked like a zombie from a horror movie. His hair was thinning, his face was gaunt, and he smelled like a truck stop toilet. He told me to stay in school and make something of myself. He told me not to end up like him, not to let people I thought were my friends drag me down into something I couldn't get back out of. Whether he knew it or not, he spoke the words that the strange man had said to me when he told me to never come back to our old neighborhood. "It's a trap, son. The only thing it can do is ruin you." When his apartment burned down a few months later, Mom didn't even take me to his funeral. I was 15 by then, just starting high school, and ready for the rest of my life. My grandparents had money, the kind of money that I now understand my mom wanted. They gave both of us the best life they could. With my grandfather's influence, I got into private school after private school. My mother made it very clear that I wasn't to squander the gifts I'd been given, and I took her at her word. By the time I was 18, I was at the top of my class and ready to enter almost any college I wanted. College was where I met Tabitha, though. Tabitha was where everything changed. I enrolled in a prestigious college, but I won't sully their reputation by naming them here. They were proud to name me amongst their alumni when I first stepped into their halls of learning. I took to my classes much the way I had taken to high school classes. I excelled, was noticed, and was praised for my hard work. I made the dean's list and was invited to join the kinds of academic circles that would ensure I had my own level of influence when the time came for my children to attend school. I was as far from that sidewalk in my old neighborhood as I had ever been. Little did I know, I was much closer than I thought. Tabitha was a year above me. She was a film major I'd met through a friend, and I knew I wanted her from the first time I saw her. My friend Jace was not what you would call centered on his studies. Jace had been accepted on a sports scholarship, and I had accepted that he was a burnout who was here to party and meet girls. Jace thought it was the height of hilarity to get me to skip out on my studies and hang out with him and his other friends, and Tabitha was one such friend. It was she who brought me about to the return of my old life. It all started because Jace was in my room, calling the person he bought drugs from. "Damn it!" he yelled, slamming the phone down and startling me from my work. "He won't sell me anymore," he sulked, drawing his feet to his chest as he sat on my bed. "Says my friends keep calling and coming by, and he thinks we're bringing heat around. Where am I supposed to get my Aether now?" Aether was a drug that was trendy on campus at the time. I knew it was amphetamine-based, but other than that, I had little knowledge of it. I didn't take drugs. I wanted to stay sharp, and other than the knowledge I gained from Jace and his friends, I was pretty ignorant of the whole culture. I was supposed to get some for the party tonight. Now I gotta show up empty-handed. A party, I thought. Maybe Tabitha would be there. I wanted to see her again, but if Jace wasn't invited to any more parties, neither would I. I thought fast and realized that I might not be as ignorant about the culture as I thought. Maybe I did know someone. I know a place you could get some drugs, I said, almost shyly. An hour later, we pulled up in front of my Uncle Randy's house. Uncle Randy was what I had always called Dad's friend Randall for most of my life. He and Dad had been childhood friends. Uncle Randy had been the best man at my parents' wedding, and I kept in touch with him a little after Dad died. His house had once been pretty, too pretty for a bachelor, Mom would often say, but now it looked run down and kind of creepy when we pulled up. Jace looked at me as if to say this was not how he was used to buying drugs, but I climbed out and told him to follow me. Randy was on the front porch, and he looked rough. He had clearly been cooking for quite some time. Burn scars and adult acne spotted his face. His receding hairline had been scooped back until the shiny pate drew attention to the greasy ponytail that hung limply off the back of his head. He looked like every internet troll you'd ever seen memed, but his weaselly eyes were full of dull hate and a bright hunger for whatever he could get from others. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes never smiled. We bought Aether from him, and were gone without much catching up or small talk. Apparently Uncle Randy did not have time for small talk anymore. The party was a huge success. Tabitha was there, and after Jace told them all how I had saved the party, she warmed up to me considerably. I didn't need the aether that she puffed into my mouth with every passionate kiss. I was high enough off just being that close to her. She spent most of the party with her hand wrapped around mine, her body pressed against me. We were dating after that. I wouldn't use aether. Just getting a contact high when we kissed was enough for me. She called it aether hopping, and delighted in pushing the potent smoke into my mouth with every kiss. We started becoming very close. As we spent more and more time together, I tried to juggle my studies with the rush of my new girlfriend. I had always been too consumed by my term papers, or the collegiate essay, to have much time for a companion. With Tabitha, though, I felt happy in her distraction and full of her presence. Eventually, we graduated from college and moved into our own apartment. She got work as a columnist for a magazine, and I started work as an architect for a firm in the city. The money was good, we were both making enough to do the things we loved, and we found ample time to spend with each other. Tabitha kept her drug use under control, and I had broken myself of what little habit I had. Tabitha was enough for me, and I hoped I was enough for her. I was so naive. We'd been together about a year when she started spiraling. She said that she wrote better when she was on aether. She certainly wrote more, but probably not better. The magazine she wrote for began to kick the articles back, not pleased with her work. This made her more self-conscious and made her use more. As the money stopped coming in, she still seemed to find ways to get aether. She never asked me for money, and I could always tell when she was just going day to day, trying to find her fix. In hindsight, I should have realized what was going on. She began to be gone for long periods of time, always coming home tired and irritable. She was aloof and confrontational. When I confronted her about it, she became aggressive and often combative. I never knew what to do in these cases. She was so removed from the Tabitha I had fallen in love with, and I didn't know what to do with her when she became this venom-spitting demon. Afterwards, we always made up. She said how sorry she was, and promised she'd never do it again. Then we repeated the experience a few weeks later. The night she came home with bruises was really when I lost it. We fought, a screaming match like none we'd ever had, and she stormed out of the apartment. I heard her car start up and leave the lot. I just sat in our apartment, wondering what I should do. What I did in the end was follow her. I had often worried that her drug use might send her spiraling out of control, so I had installed a program on her phone that would let me track its location. I know this sounds invasive, but I was terrified that she might get lost or hurt, and I might need to find her quickly. Aether has some severe health risks, and the thought of her having a heart attack or something, and no one being able to find her, hurt me deeply. I wish, now that I had just let her leave. I followed her to the neighborhood. I followed her to Uncle Randy's house. Her car was parked outside. As I walked up, I could already hear a low noise coming from the living room. The lights were off, the living room curtains were drawn, but they were illuminated from behind by the glow of the TV. The door was ajar, one of her purple sneakers left across the threshold. As I pushed the door open, I could hear Tabitha's heady moans and could guess what was going on. Randall was her supplier. When she couldn't pay him, she had settled up in other ways. Now she was in his living room, paying with the only currency she had left. I'd like to say that I flew into a rage, but I didn't. I'd like to say that I blacked out, but I didn't. I remember everything with crystal clarity. I opened the coat closet and took out the shotgun I knew that he had there from childhood. It was loaded, as it always was, and Uncle Randy had kept it as clean and oiled as the day he had shown it to 7-year-old me. He told me it was for bad people that might want to hurt him. He told me it wasn't a toy, and I should never point a gun at anyone I didn't want dead. A lesson that came back to bite him that day. Tabitha screamed when she saw me framed in the living room door. She had been smiling a moment before, but now all the blood had drained from her face. She looked like the corpse she would soon become. Randy turned his head, that greasy tail swinging. He looked at me in surprise, and I leveled the shotgun at the two of them, my face a cold mask of indifference. Tabitha said my name, mouthed it before her perfect chest was a spray of blood, and the buckshot turned it into a pitted landscape of gore and viscera. Randy said nothing. The first shot had opened up the top of his skull, and he died instantly. She lay atop him, tears welling in her eyes as she fought for breath. She fixed me with those eyes as if to say, well, what else was I supposed to do? I didn't have an answer for her. I just dropped the gun on the worn rug and walked out onto the front porch to wait for the cops. I wasn't there when she died. I didn't hold her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was. I just sat on the porch and listened to her gasp out her breaths until they were muffled by the sound of approaching police sirens. I was convicted of a double homicide at the age of 22. I was given 2 life sentences, and I will never see the outside world again. Except, I guess I will. I don't know how old I'll be when the program makes me an offer. The self I met was old, but everyone over 20 is old to an 8-year-old. If I had to guess, I would say he was somewhere in his 40s, but that's just a guess. He told me I would be in prison for 20 years. I guess this is a fact that's set in stone. As I sit in my cell and think about my future, I often think about what he said. Someone saw me take you off the street. At least they did last time. That leads me to believe that he experienced this when he was a child. Maybe I always go back and try to warn myself, and perhaps I always fail. What if my life is nothing but a loop of trying and dying to keep myself from coming to Randy's living room and ruining my life? How long has this loop been going on? What would happen if I closed it? Would I simply cease to exist? I lay on my single bed some nights, staring at the roaches crawling across the ceiling, and think about the people who have brought me to this point. My mother, my father, my grandparents, Jace, Tabitha, Uncle Randy, and I somehow know what must be done as they all swim by. When it's my turn to step into the past, I don't think I'll explain anything. I might just take the gun out of my pocket and shoot myself as I sit rooted in the passenger seat and see what happens next. I've got 20 years to think about it, I guess. Plenty of time to work out the finer points of my own murder. You know, every time it rains, I'm really glad that I didn't let them talk me into shingles. There's just something about the sound of rain on a tin roof that makes me feel very cozy. I don't know how to explain it, but it's one of my very deep pleasures. We've all had friends that have a strange parent, a strange grandparent, that have odd rituals or an odd connection to the person. Well, in this story, we learn about Charlie and his odd relationship with his grandmother, or, as Charlie calls it, his grandmom's love.
I don't know if anyone's going to read this. I don't even know if anyone will care. But I have to tell somebody. It's too much to process right now, and maybe if I get some of it off my chest, it will make it easier to handle. I'm getting ready to go into the unknown, and I feel like someone needs to know why. Someone needs to know how it came to all this, and how I came to be a potential murderer/avenging angel. Above all else, I need to tell someone about Charlie. I'd known Charlie since we were in grade school together. Charlie thought of us as brothers, since he didn't have any of his own, and loved us like family. Despite that, never think we were the most important people in Charlie's life. No, the most important person in Charlie's life was his grandmother. Charlie's grandmother, he'd always called her Grandmom, was the one who raised Charlie since the day he was born. Charlie's mother died in childbirth, and his father died before he was even born, so without a guardian, that just left Charlie and his grandmom. Grandmom and Charlie. Charlie's grandmom lived out in the country, in an old wooden farmhouse with a big backyard and acres of fields for growing things. She rented the land to sharecroppers and must have done pretty well for herself because Charlie couldn't recall a time she'd ever had to work. Charlie didn't have any other family, none that he'd ever met anyway, and for the first 8 years of his life it was just the two of them alone in that farmhouse. Charlie said he remembered being sick a lot as a kid, and most of his earlier memories were he and his grandmom on the couch while she nursed him back to health from one illness or another. Grandmom would sit at home with him while he convalesced, watching Sesame Street and eating whatever Grandmom could whip up in the kitchen. Most days, Charlie would just spend the whole day on her lap while she rocked him and hummed strange little Russian songs to him. Grandmom wasn't originally from here, you see. She had emigrated during the Second Great War, and she and his grandfather had moved out to the country because it reminded her of her childhood home. Coming from the old country, she had all kinds of folk remedies, good-tasting recipes, and strange little songs that she would sing to Charlie as he drifted off to sleep or lay sick on the couch. One in particular that Charlie recalled fondly had become a ritual of sorts, a ritual that goes on to this day, I assume. that took on the normalcy of time and repetition. She would take him on her lap, pull his face close to hers, and place her hands on his cheeks as she put their foreheads together. Charlie recalled the bumpy, veiny skin there beneath his smooth baby skin as she did this, and the warmth that always seemed to radiate from her. With their foreheads pressed together, she would sing a strange song to him in her thick Russian tone before releasing him and planting a kiss on his forehead. "What does it mean, Grandmom?" Charlie would always ask, and the asking was as much a part of the ritual as the ritual itself. "It means," she would say in her warm, gravelly voice, "always together, even when apart. Always a part of me, here in my heart." Charlie had never thought it was odd that he lived in relative isolation with his grandmother. Not until he started school. His grandmom had tried to homeschool him for a few years, but her teaching wasn't up to the state standards, so she had grudgingly allowed Charlie to attend public school. Here Charlie came into contact with other children, and first learned how strange his situation was. In class, we would do assignments or draw pictures of our family, and Charlie's was always the smallest when put up on the bulletin board with the rest. Charlie began to wonder why he didn't have any uncles or aunts or cousins, or any family besides Grandmom. When he asked her, though, she always shrugged and gave him the same answer. "Your grandfather and I had the one child. Your father was not a strong boy. He was sick, often like you are, and we were afraid to have another. By the time he was old enough to over his sickness, your grandfather was dead, and it was only me and your father." That made Charlie feel a little better. His father had been like him in that sense, sickly and alone with his grandmom, so it couldn't be that strange. That didn't stop the other kids from teasing him, though. I remember Charlie when he first arrived at school, and the other kids had him pegged as an oddball from the get-go. Going to school in the early 90s, it was all about how cool you were, how many cool things you had on your clothes. Charlie showed up the first day of school looking like the boy from the hot chocolate box my mom always bought. He wore suspenders and stockings, knee boots, and shirts with weird fringes on them. He stuck out like a sore thumb. This, mixed with his funny way of talking and his stunted knowledge base, made the other kids think he was slow and kind of a dweeb. He came in for quite a bit of ridicule, and I recall it was a hard couple of days before my friends and I got involved. This is where I come into Charlie's story, I guess. I had never taken part in the teasing, and over time I began to feel bad for him. I pushed some of my friends to invite him to play with us, and we were surprised to find not a dumb kid, but an imaginative kid, who joined in our games eagerly. His Grandmom, had taught him a little Russian, which we thought was just the coolest, and we gave him some of our old clothes to wear so he didn't stand out quite so much. Together, we played G.I. Joes or superheroes or whatever the game of the day happened to be, and outside of play, we helped Charlie stand up for himself and make the bullies stop. As we got older, Charlie stayed at our place a lot, and we really helped him come out of his shell and adapt to life outside of Grandmom's house. We were friends with Charlie all the way through high school, and after high school, we all thought we might get an apartment together. Zach, Tristan, Charlie, and I, so we could attend college together. Charlie was hesitant. He didn't want to leave his poor old grandmom alone in the middle of the woods. So when he turned up at the house a few days later with a scant few possessions, I was pretty surprised. He had 2 plastic bags of clothes, a zipper bag of toiletries. After some coaxing, he told me he and his grandmom had had a really nasty fight. This surprised me, because I'd never heard of Charlie's grandmom ever raising her voice to him in all the time I'd known him. And he seemed just as shocked about the outburst as we were. She had refused to give him any of his stuff, except what he'd brought with him, and told him not to expect her to send him money or anything else. If he moved out now, he was on his own. You could tell how upset he was, poor guy, and we helped him out as best we could. He ended up sleeping on my couch until his first Pell check came in, and after that, he just kind of made do. I had expected that would be the end of his closeness with his grandmom, but I couldn't have been more wrong. After a few weeks of silence, she went back to calling him every day, and to our astonishment, he made plans to have dinner with her and help her with her shopping. She would send him money sometimes, and he would go over several days a week to eat dinner or lunch, and slowly things began to return to normal. She still wouldn't let him take any of his stuff out of her house, but he got some new stuff, and by the time his first semester was done, he had everything that he needed. Things went on in this way for about 3 years, at least until last Wednesday. Charlie and I had just got back from class when he got a call from his grandmom. His face fell as they talked, and you could tell that Charlie was barely holding back tears. She hadn't been doing well for several years, nearly from the time Charlie moved out, and I personally thought it was a guilt trip to keep her grandson close to home, though I'd never say as much to Charlie. He talked to her for a few minutes and then immediately went to his room and packed an overnight bag. He told me to tell his counselor that he had a family emergency and needed to go home to be with his grandmother. When I asked him what was going on, he told me that she was dying and she wanted him to stay with her until she passed. I commiserated with him and told him to give her my best and to stay in contact so we knew when he'd be back. That was a week ago, and it was the last time anyone has ever seen or heard from Charlie. His car is gone, his things are gone from his room, and Charlie has disappeared without a trace. I drove the hour to his grandmother's house, hoping to find some clues when I got there, only to be greeted by a stranger when the door opened. She was a tall, dark-haired woman with lank hair and a swollen, pregnant belly, and she was no one I had ever seen before. Yeah, hell, Charlie and his grandmom were the only two people I'd ever seen at the house before now. She claimed to be a distant relative that had inherited the house from Charlie's grandmother when she died. She didn't seem to speak English very well, and was completely unsure as to who Charlie was or where he had gone to. We quickly lost patience with each other, and she yelled at me to leave before she called the authorities. I seethed all the way home, but I couldn't get any answers out of her. I got my answers last night. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning when something woke me up from a deep sleep. My legs were full of pins and felt like someone was sitting on them. I rolled over, thinking one of my roommates had wandered in drunk, only to find Charlie sitting on my bed. Even in the dim light, I could tell something was wrong. Charlie looked bad, withered somehow, like a grape that gets left in the crisper drawer for too long. Or a corpse after it's dried out in a grave. He spoke to me, his voice a rattling rasp in my ears, and told me that something had happened. He'd gone to be with his grandmom. He found her on her deathbed, and she'd reached for him with her withered arms when he'd come in. He'd slumped, weeping by her bedside, and she'd reached out with her wrinkled hands and touched his face. He looked at her, and she had asked him to put his forehead against hers, so she could say the words one last time. She was my grandmom, and I loved her. How could I deny her anything? He said, his voice racked with pain. So he let her draw his face to hers, and she said the old familiar words as she always had. Always together, even when apart. Always a part of me, here in my heart. But when she kissed him on the forehead, his lips already starting to ask what it meant, he felt something strange. It was like she was taking everything from me. My breath, my blood, my bones, my seed, and all with that single kiss on my forehead. As she had taken all of it from him, he had crumpled up into a dried husk as she changed before his eyes. Her hair darkened, her skin tightened, her eyes sparkled, and he said that her belly had grown large even as her breasts grew heavy with milk. When she stood over him, she was 50 years younger, a girl of 20, and I realized that she was the woman who had opened the door for me. She stood over him, cackling at his desiccated form, and her face was devoid of the love that had always been there. Now you'll see why I have kept you close all these years. Now you'll see the fruit of my labor, just as your father did before you and your grandfather before him, she said, looking down at Charlie without pity or remorse. Why? He asked huskily, his voice dry as a desert. Why have you done this? Why? This is the state that befalls all your line. Males for centuries and centuries. Males from the first of your name to crawl upon this earth. He told me I was ugly. He spat on my love, and he promised me that I would never have him. I promised him that I would have all of his line, bear them and break them. So I have from that time on. Your son, she said, and gave her belly a little stroke, will be no different. And as she stood cackling over him, Charlie died and passed into the void that waits beyond. He told me all of this as I sat huddled by the head of my bed, but promised me that she was wrong. She would have no more from his line. The cycle would end with his son. He told me some things he understood now, and called his grandmother a vedma, which is the Russian word for witch. He also called her a strigoi, but he hopes he's wrong about that. A mortal man may kill a vedma, if he is very lucky, he told me, but a strigoi is another matter entirely. He made me promise if I ever called him friend, to rescue my son and kill his grandmom, once and for all. It will be dark soon, and he says that tonight will be the night of her delivery, which will make her weak. I'm leaving this here just in case I don't come back, in case someone out there might save Charlie's son if I fail. I have the things I need, and midnight will be here before I know it. I hope I'm strong enough to do what must be done. I pray I don't come to my friends in the night with a similar request. I pray that I can break this curse and make Charlie its last victim.
Thinking about maybe putting on some tea. Would you like some? I always take mine with honey. It's better for my throat and my allergies. Always lubes the pipes up just right for telling more great stories. It's never fun moving. The best part is being moved in, looking at all the empty boxes and knowing that this is where you're going to be for a while. Well, unless you have a problem like the subject of today's story does. It's tough enjoying your new place when you have to deal with the Burbles from beyond. We recently moved into our new house. It's perfect, just the right size for our family, but it has a strange problem with the drains. I noticed it while I was unpacking the bathroom things. I turned to discover that my husband hadn't flushed and pushed the lever to send it down the drain. When I did, I discovered that the sinks burble whenever you flush the toilet. Nothing too jarring, but it scared me a little when I first heard it. The sink burbled and bubbled, making a noise deep in the drain as it cleared the water. My husband laughed it off when I mentioned it to him. "It's an old house, dear. The pipes are on the central line that feeds into the septic tank. No one has used them in a while, so it's probably just getting used to people being here again." I blew it off as a weird thing the house did and just went about my business. A week later, the drain started burbling when I took a shower, too. I overlooked it, though, not wanting to dwell on something I ultimately couldn't do anything about. This was the first place I'd lived with a septic tank. I'd always used city water, and I figured it was just something that happened when you used a septic tank. My husband barely seemed to notice it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary. After a few weeks, I had almost come to ignore it, until the whispering started. I was brushing my teeth one night, running the water as I always did, when I heard the burbling coming from the drain again. I had bent my mouth to the stream to get a mouthful of water, when I could have sworn I heard a burbling kind of whisper coming from the drain. It was barely audible, more like a gurgle than a burble, but as I listened, it almost sounded like words. Black bank bees. Back bank bees. I turned off the water, spitting my mouth full of paste down the drain, and closed the door behind me. The burbling got worse from there on out. It didn't just bubble when the water was on. It always bubbled, loud and jarring, and I was still certain I could hear some kind of whispering. My husband just shrugged it off as normal. He was busy with work and didn't have time to indulge his flighty wife. I put up with it as best I could, but it was honestly starting to grate on my nerves a bit. I heard it in the kitchen, the living room, and especially whenever I had to go to the bathroom. The bathroom seemed to be the epicenter, and as the days progressed, I became more and more confident I could hear words amidst the gurgles. I lost my cool one night when my husband was working late. As I lay in bed, my son sleeping soundly next to me, I could hear the sink burbling and whispering from the hall bathroom. The bubbles were visible now when it burbled, deep green bubbles that sloshed up the drain and filled the sink with a stagnant water smell. Never when my husband was at home, of course, and the bastard didn't believe me when I showed him the thin film that hung on the bowl. As I lay there listening, the gurgling seemed to mock me. It seemed like only I could hear it, and the continued surge of tidal force had frazzled me. I was up before I knew what I was doing. I stomped down the hall in my pajamas, heading for the bathroom on bare feet. I was mad. I'd had enough of it, and I slammed the door open as I saw the towel rack shake ominously. I flipped on the lights like I was intending to catch the sink doing something wrong, and shouted loud enough to make my son stir and cry in his sleep. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" I screamed at the burbling sink. And, for a wonder, it did. The drain stopped burbling for a few seconds, and there was peace. Then a geyser erupted from the drain and splashed high enough to splatter the ceiling in a green fountain. It splattered the walls, pattered against the shower curtain, and caused the ceiling to rain drops of thick sludge. I'd fallen to my backside in the hallway, watching the geyser with wide eyes, when I saw something gloop out of the drain that made me scream. I scuttled across the floor, my back hitting the bedroom door, hearing my son cry out from the bedroom. I had seen the last thing I would have expected from the narrow bathroom drain, and I was certain now that I could hear something else joining it as it gurgled onto the bathroom floor. A hand. A hand of sludgy, green liquid that had pushed its way up the drain like an angry hurricane. I reached with numb fingers for the knob, the fingers refusing to find purchase as I slapped at it uneasily. I heard a gurgling thunk then, the sound of water trying to maintain a shape it was unaccustomed to, and something cast a shadow against the door. The best way I can describe it is the shadow appeared to be cast by a living jello mold. It was solid, but not transparent. It cast a watery shadow, its form undulating as it came towards the door. A single green watery hand gripped the door frame. I screamed as it lumbered into the hallway, and my grasping hand felt like a dead fish. It was 6 feet tall, bulbous and amorphous, with a shuddering bald head. Its eyes were murky green coals, and its form was a wiggling mass of barely contained fluid. The fluid was, well, it was awful. It had clearly drawn its matter from the septic tank, and the things floating within the water didn't bear thinking about. It took a single unsure step, the unstable golem shaking as it took another tottering step forward. My son was screaming now, unsure where I was, and his terror only amplified my fear. As it wobbled towards me, leaving puddles of oozing liquid on the floor, I heard the burbling voice again as it whisper-wailed its words. Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees. I tried again to open the door, my eyes locked in terror on this watery monstrosity. Beck, bank, bees! Beck, bank, bees! I felt my own water puddle on the floor as my bladder let go, the creature towering over me. Beck, bank, bees! It yelled. It leaned over me, and I could feel the stagnant drops fall onto my face. I wanted to cover my nose. It smelled like raw sewage, but I was too afraid to move. I was sure in that moment that I would never see my husband or my son again. He would return home to find me dead, maybe find our son dead too in his bed. He would see the water and always wonder what had happened to me. As this creature crouched over me, I was certain that the last thing I saw would be his terrible sewage form. It bent its watery lips to my face then, and when it whispered this time, I could hear something different. Check. Tank. Please. The words were spoken as though they might break the creature, and they were spoken with the utmost emphasis. His speech was slushy, slurry, as though his tongue was missing. He was approximating speech, but it was still difficult to make out. I looked into those green orbs and repeated back what he had said. Check, tank, please? It nodded its liquid head, its featureless face almost looking relieved. Then it melted into a deluge of stagnant water, and I was covered in buckets of disgusting sewage. My husband didn't believe me. I was still cleaning up sewage when he came home, and he was utterly flabbergasted. I told him about the creature, about its final message, but he refused to believe it. It was a dream, he said. The septic tank had backflowed into the house, and I had dreamed this watery creature. We went back and forth for hours, until finally I had the solution. Open up the septic tank, then. If there's nothing there, then I'll never say another word about it. I'll deal with the gurgles and the bubbles, and I'll never say another word about anything. After another hour of arguing, he finally relented. We called a service, and they breached the lid. It wasn't too hard. The earth was removed, and the lid was removed with a little backhoe. The smell was atrocious, but the men didn't seem to mind. My husband told them that we had a problem with the tank. It flowed into the house, and they figured the valve had been stuck. I saw the pumper hose descend, and the tank was emptied. My husband said I didn't need to be there for this, but I wanted to see. As the sewage went down, I saw the operator's eyes grow large. He called his partner over, and a flashlight was found. The flashlight nearly fell into the tank when it fell across the sewage-covered lump. His partner told us that it appeared to be something in the tank, but we shouldn't worry. The house has been empty for a while. It's probably just a congealed mass or something. The operator continued to pump the tank, and as the water level fell, we saw that the lump was more than a congealed mass of waste. It was a body. The police were called. Our front yard was soon playing host to 3 squad cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance. The techs were shunted aside as the rescue team received the body from the septic tank and loaded the remains into a body bag for identification. The police asked us some questions, but had already cleared us for the most part, since the body appeared to have been there for months. The inspector had likely not breached the tank at all during the initial inspection, so the body could have been there for years if it had been sealed properly. As the bag was zipped, I got a momentary glance at him. It was large, the head bald and lumpy. It looked a little like the sewage form that had tottered over me in the hallway. Before they zipped it up, the desiccated creature's mouth lolled open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His tongue was mangled. Since the incident, we've heard no more burbling. The septic tank hasn't sputtered, and the house has been quiet since that night. Other than the sounds of our family, of course. My husband still can't explain how I knew there was a body in the tank, but I'm just glad that there was ultimately a happy ending to the story. So next time you hear a burbling in your pipes, don't discount it as simple plumbing issues. Your house may be hearing burbles from beyond. Just took the tea off, so I guess I better let it cool down a little bit before I scorch my mouth like I usually do. But I think maybe we've got time for one more story before I sign off. Going on trips is usually fun. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be a nerve-wracking experience. But when the subject of today's story gets a little bit more than she bargained for on her trip, she realizes that it might be hard to get away.
Liz couldn't really say she didn't know why she was here, but she could question why. Why a wise and just God would leave her here was beyond her, and if this was his plan, she wasn't sure of his wisdom. She could see him standing in the shadow of the palm trees, eyes red like a dog caught in the flash of a camera. All it did was stare, but she felt as if it wasn't all it intended to do. The trip had been one they'd planned for years, a girls' trip to the Bahamas, just her and her old sorority sisters, on a cruise for 5 sun-soaked days. Liz had been looking forward to it. It'd be nice to get out of the house for a while. Her BA in administration had mostly made a great dust catcher in the last 8 years since her graduation. Between the kids, the house, and her husband, and her call center job that she did to bring in a little spending money, she had little time for anything else. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Liz had contented herself with talking with her old sorority sisters, Janet, Claudia, and Maria, about their lives and what they'd all been up to. Janet wrote for a food blog, she and her husband jet-setting around as he ran his export business, and Liz loved to hear about all the foreign places she found herself in. Claudia was a lawyer, always the brains of the bunch, and Liz often celebrated with her over the computer about her courtroom victories. Maria was a designer in New York, and Liz would be lying if she didn't admit that she grudgingly lived vicariously through her bestie. Maria lived like one of the girls on Sex and the City, with a constant diet of different men, different gigs, and different problems that seemed to fix themselves before they got out of hand. Liz's life, in contrast, was pretty mundane. Her friends gushed appreciatively over the pictures of her kids, none of them having any, but it was clear that their admiration was mostly lip service. They were out living spectacular lives, while Liz was stuck in the gilded cage with her eggs. She was comfortable. Harold was a good man who took care of the bills and gave her whatever she wanted. She loved her kids dearly, but watching her friends as they went about their lives made her feel like hers was going nowhere. As she sat beside the fire, alone and watching the red-eyed creature, she now wished that she had stayed in her comfortable rut. When she had told Harold about the trip, his only real concern had been who would watch the kids. Harold was a dutiful husband, but he reminded her of an old song her mother had liked. She couldn't remember the name, but her mother had played it on cassette as she cleaned the house. Harold reminded her of a line from the song, one her mother always sang in tones of deepest disgust, a line that embodied Harold as much as it embodied her own father. "I'll raise the children while you go have a beer. Where is my John Wayne? Where is his shining gun? Where's my lonely ranger?
"Where have all the cowboys gone?" It was a good line. It had encompassed her life so well. Harold was not the owner of an export business. He wasn't a model or a defense attorney who might be moved to sleep with her after a trial. Harold was an assistant manager in a company that made oil drilling equipment. He was nice enough. He was stable. But his interest in her had clearly waned. It had happened sometime after their second child. She saw his eyes began to wander, and if he wasn't already having an affair, then his impending midlife crisis would surely drive him into one. She had assured him that her sister would watch the kids while he was at work, but that he might have to miss his after-work bar trips this week. "I'm sure she'll watch them on Saturday, though, so you can meet your associates at the links for your golf game." In retrospect, she thought he might have been a little too glad to hear how her sister, 19 and home from college, would be coming to sit with the kids. But that might just be in her head. The news that he could still golf on the weekends had softened his mood a bit. He even slipped her a few extra hundreds so she could fly to Orlando instead of driving. The idea that she might be stuck in traffic and miss her cruise was comforting now. But as she thought about the reunion with her friends, it brought a smile to her cracked lips. They had all met at the airport. First Liz and Maria, with Janet and Claudia flying in an hour later. The four had gone to dinner, drinking and talking about what they'd been doing, and finally boarded the boat at nightfall. They'd had a grand send-off with fireworks and champagne, and the four of them had talked excitedly about what they would do once they arrived in the Bahamas. "Hope your husbands gave you a day pass, ladies," Maria joked with Janet and Liz, "'cause you never know who you might meet on this trip." As Liz stared at the man-shaped thing, its unblinking eyes focused on her like twin beams. She wasn't sure that this was the someone that Maria had meant. It had all been smooth sailing until the second night. The four of them had drank at the bar, dined in the main hall, watched a few of the floor shows, and gone to bed thoroughly pleased. Maria had come in a little later, after leaving with a fella from the bar, and Liz wondered if she might pick up a fling of her own. She had turned red at the thought. Did she dare do such a thing? She didn't think she could, but who knew what a trip might bring? The second day had been spent around the pool. Liz was a little more self-conscious than the other three. She'd never quite gotten her figure back after her second child, but that didn't stop the eyes from finding her. They soaked up the sun, pretending to ignore the ogling eyes of those who looked, and Liz felt desired in a way that she hadn't since college. Harold did his duty at least once a week, but she'd come to suspect that that was out of habit. The men who looked at her and her friends seemed willing to do far more than their duty, and the thought made her smile as she watched them from behind her sunglasses. They had dressed in their best that night, their reservations at the captain's table being semi-formal, and Liz thought she might find herself in someone else's bed besides her own later. She was feeling confident in a way that she hadn't since she had met Harold, and as they laughed over drinks and appetizers, she wished the night would never end. When the ship stopped suddenly, groaning as if it had hit something, and lurching like a wild animal, she hoped she was asleep in her bunk still, her afternoon nap still ongoing. Now she knew better. As she felt her eyes getting heavy and heard the strange singing that had marked every evening after the first, she knew that the nightmare never ended. They started to evacuate soon after the sudden stop. The ship had run up against something, and it had shredded the side. Liz and her friends were shoved into a lifeboat with about a dozen others. They bobbed out into the night as the boat rode low in the water, its guts filling with the balmy island sea. Liz reflected that at least there had been enough boats for everyone, as the crewmen rowed them towards a collection of islands nearby. As Liz sat beside her friends, the adrenaline starting to ebb and the ocean rocking her amidst the warm bodies, she felt herself starting to drift off. You'd have said that such a thing was impossible, but she could hear others yawning and one particularly loud snorer behind her. She leaned her head against Maria and felt the other woman breathing heavily. It appeared Liz wasn't the only one getting tired, and as she drifted off, she thought she heard the first snatches of a song that would become very familiar. When she woke up, she found herself alone, The boat beached as the surf pushed it in and out amongst the sand of some unknown island. Liz had no idea how long she had been there, but the fact that she was alone filled her with a palpable dread. Where had everyone gone? Was she the only one left out of the 20 or so people in the boat? She got up, but immediately sat down as her sleeping legs refused to hold her. She tried to rub some of the feeling back into them, her hands as numb as her legs, and that was when she noticed the thing around her finger. It was a ring, woven from coconut fibers, and she couldn't remember seeing anything like it before. Where had it come from, and who had put it on her? It was tight on her finger, but Liz couldn't call it uncomfortable. It sat flush against her skin, and as she lifted it up to take a better look, she saw the creature for the first time. The island swam with fog, the trees and sand leading her to believe that it must be tropical. She had seen him in the mist, leaning against a palm tree as he stared at her. The two locked eyes, and she felt her skin crawl as he stared silently. It was as if they were the only two in existence, and the longer it went on, the less human he began to look. His arms became less human as they thickened and waxed and waned. Its legs appeared to double, then triple, and its head bulged oddly before returning to its normal dimensions. It was man-shaped, but certainly no man. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but when it turned its head suddenly, the spell was broken. She heard Maria calling her through the fog, and when she turned back to look, it was gone. "Glad you're finally awake," Maria said. "We got a little worried when you wouldn't wake up." How long was I out for?" Liz asked, getting shakily to her feet as the pins began to recede. "Nearly a whole day. We left 3 others out here with you. Did all of you wake up at the same time?" Liz shook her head as Maria took her arm and led her up the beach through the fog. "We've been trying to make something that will get the attention of ships or planes, but the fog is so thick I'm not sure anyone will see us. The rest of us have been trying to get some shelters up, but it's hard to find materials in all this." As they came through the fog, Liz could see that there were around 15 others milling about. Men, women, even a couple of kids went about their tasks without much enthusiasm. They looked at Liz disinterestedly as she and Maria approached, and Liz saw Janet and Claudia as they turned rocks into words so a plane might see them. They both waved as they walked over to them. The rest of the day was spent raising lean-tos and setting up fire pits. She met some of the others, her fellow castaways, and they seemed to have quite a mixed bag. There was Ben and his sister Catherine, Angela and her daughter Celeste, Margot, Roger, his boyfriend Francis, Tracy, who carried around a typewriter case with a manuscript inside, Gail, Kathy, and her son, Gregory. They feasted on nuts and fruit, coconuts, and some little crabs that Ben and Francis had managed to scare up around dusk, and as they ate, the group discussed what they would do tomorrow. "It might be nice to take stock of the island," Ben said. "Find out if there are any others here." "A source of fresh water might be good, too," Maria put in, and Liz couldn't help but notice that she kept looking shyly at the older man as he agreed. Liz tried to keep up, but it was hard to focus on planning. It was hard to focus on anything with the pair of red eyes that stared at her from the nearby palm tree. No one else seemed to have noticed it, and the longer it stared, the more she realized that it was staring only at her. Whatever the creature was, it seemed to have eyes only for Liz, though the attention was far from flattering. Her finger itched, and Liz realized that it was the first time she had thought about the ring in a while. She wondered if it had been given to her while she slept. Why not just take her too, if it had gotten that close? As the others began to get comfortable, Liz watched the creature in the fog as it stood its lonely vigil, which was why she was still awake when the singing began. Liz didn't know where it came from, or whether it had anything to do with the mysterious voyeur, but she blinked a little too long and found the red eyes had gone when she was awake. She sat blinking, the sounds of snoring vibrating around her. The night was suddenly split by a heavy baritone. It rolled across the sleeping people, hitting Liz like the warm steam off a cup of tea. As she watched, a few of her fellow survivors staggered up, getting to their feet and walking towards the jungle. They moved like sleepwalkers, their legs taking them shakily into the fog. In the dark, Liz wasn't certain who it had been, but in the morning, there were 2 less than there had been the day before. She hadn't slept that night, but as the sun came up and turned the fog into a blanket of diamonds, she pretended to. The last thing she wanted was to answer questions about missing people. No one seemed to notice at first, but by noon the disappearance of 2 people was hard to ignore. "Any idea where Roger and Francis are?" Catherine asked, looking around like she might have just missed them. "Off doing God knows what, I'm sure," Ben muttered, drawing some dark looks from a few of the others. He had made his displeasure at the pair of them pretty clear to everyone but them, and didn't seem to care about their disappearance too much. A couple of people talked about going to look for them, but it was finally decided that if they had gone off on their own, then they would either come back or they wouldn't. People went about their day, some looking for food, others trying to find planes or boats to hail. As the day spun out, Liz wondered if she should tell someone what she had seen the night before. She hadn't told anyone about the man-shaped thing in the jungle, and if it was the same thing taking people, maybe they needed to know. Her thoughts chased her throughout the day, but as the sun set and the fire cast sparks into the night sky, Liz found herself awake and searching for the creature. She hadn't had far to look. It had been there since dusk, just watching her as she sat by the fire. The fog was still a thick pea soup, and the image within it swelled and distorted as she kept an eye on it. Her head dipped and jittered as she tried to stay awake, but when the singing began tonight, it was like a sweet lullaby. She saw 3 shapes rise around her, the fire turning them into silhouettes against the sparks, and as they stumbled away from the dancing flame, she tried to call out to them, to raise some kind of an alarm. She was fading away as the deep, resonant voice drowned her amidst the crashing waves of the beach, however, and soon she found herself asleep. The camp awoke to find they were 10 now, and Liz discovered that one of the shades had been Claudia. Another had been Angela's daughter, and she was beside herself with grief. "Has anyone seen Celeste? She was right here next to me when I fell asleep last night." "We should go look for them," Maria suggested, looking pleadingly at Liz and Janet as she tried to move the others to go with her. Most didn't seem keen on going off into the mist to hunt for people who'd disappeared, especially if there was something out there taking them. Liz found it impossible not to be moved by Maria's words, though, and Janet seemed to feel the same. Claudia was their friend, and Celeste was just a child. The thought of them lost and scared in a strange place made Liz's heart ache, and the 3 assured Angela that they would try their best to find her daughter. She thanked them tearfully. The disappearance had left her in a state of grief so deep that she could do little but sit and rock as she cried. In the end, the 3 set out to search for those who had disappeared, and the others watched them leave, with not much expectation that they would see them again. The foliage smooshed wetly underfoot as they searched, the fog a constant blanket around them. The palms gave way to thin pines and wispy spruces that seemed to grow small, round nuts. The ground was far too wet to see much. Any footprints that might have existed were obliterated by the soupy ground, and as the 3 women searched the jungle, they found no trace of the missing people. Liz was no tracker, but in the movies there were always signs left behind when someone went missing in the woods. Fabric left on a tree, hair hanging from a branch, maybe a swatch of blood smeared across the bark. But there was none of that here. It was as if the island had swallowed them up, leaving nothing behind to mark their passage from life to death. The whole time, Liz felt like she was being followed. She glanced fitfully around as she looked for the man-shaped thing. She caught the odd glance of something, some vague shape amidst the mist, but it was impossible to tell if it was her voyeur or not. She felt pursued, this thing dogging her heels wherever she went, and she began to wonder if it was the thing that had summoned them to the island. Were they all just lunch for this creature? A game of cat and mouse to break up the monotony of its existence? When the sun began to set, they were forced to head back to camp empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Angela was inconsolable. The group came together for her, but their eyes were more often than not on the jungle. The fires were stoked, and as people began to get comfortable for sleep, Liz found herself too tired to join them. She had collapsed after they'd returned from the search, exhausted from all that walking, and her sleep had been heavy and dreamless. That night, Liz finally got to meet her mysterious watcher, and it likely saved them from another loss. It was late when she jerked awake, unsure how long she'd been asleep. The fire was burning low now, the ashes flickering into the sky as the logs crumbled beneath the assault of the heat. Liz thought at first that the waves had woken her up, but as she glanced into the gathering shadow, she could see those red eyes as they bore into her. They were closer now, maybe 15 feet away, but Liz was finding it harder and harder to be terrified of her mysterious watcher. The longer she sat looking at those red eyes, the more curious Liz found herself. "Hello?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to wake anyone up. The red eyes blinked, unsure, but when a voice answered her, it was very different from the deep baritone she'd heard singing at night. "Hello," it answered, its voice unsure as its features remained unknowable from behind the thick fog. Do you live here?" Liz asked, feeling foolish almost at once. It had been here since before they got here. Of course it lived here. "Yes, for most of my life, I think." The two talked for a bit, Liz becoming more comfortable the longer it didn't simply leap on her and gobble her up. It confirmed her suspicions that the island wasn't boundless and that her group of survivors were the only people here. She asked about the fog, and it told her that it just always was here, but that it kept everything nice and cool, so it wasn't unwelcome. It would have amazed her how quickly she fell into a normal conversation with this creature if she hadn't been so absolutely exhausted. As it stood, it seemed like the most natural thing to have happened in a while. "Are you the one singing at night?" she asked after it finished telling her about the caves near the edge of the island. It was beginning to lighten on the horizon, and Liz realized that it might leave before she got some of her burning questions answered. The eyes had been crinkling a little as it spoke, clearly enjoying their talk, but as she asked about the song, they took a different downturn. Was it mistrust, or was he ashamed of the answer? "Yes, that's me," he answered, clearly hesitant. Are you the one—" "Liz?" someone said sleepily, and Liz turned to see Maria sitting up groggily. Who are you talking to?" Liz turned back to introduce Maria to the thing she'd been so comfortably chatting with, but it was gone. "No one. Must have been talking in my sleep," Liz answered. There were no new missing people in the morning, but it did little to help the tension. Ben had started talking about making spears or something to defend themselves, but most of the others were more concerned with surviving. Even so, the foragers took homemade spears he had made when they went to look for food. His sister Catherine tried to talk to him, telling him that he was making everyone anxious, but he loudly told her that everyone should be worried about whatever was taking people in the night. Angela looked like a ghost as she sat looking at the waves, and people seemed content to give her space. She was mourning the loss of her daughter, and it was unclear whether her tears were swelling the ocean or the ocean was rushing forward to give her its salt. Liz found herself thinking about the odd creature as she went about her day. It hadn't been like she had expected, and she found herself wondering if it had really been the one taking people. She still hadn't told anyone about it, and most of the others would have assumed that she was going crazy. The thought of those red eyes creeping up to talk to her in the night would have scared some of them and made others think that she was losing it. Worse yet, she suspected that Ben would stay up and try to fight it if she told him, so she kept her mysterious new friend to herself. For the next week, she would stay up after the fire burned low and meet with it. She didn't hear the singing on those nights, and the red eyes seemed more than happy to come back night after night so they could learn more about her. Whatever it was, it seemed very interested in Liz and the life she had lived on the mainland. They talked about boats and cars and television, the food she used to eat, the people she'd known, her family, anything else the creature could think of. Liz would find herself watching him as his body did strange things, thickening and shriveling, multiplying and dividing, and the longer she watched it, the less afraid she became. The longer they talked, the less substantial it seemed to become, and that worried her. Liz found that she was afraid of losing it, the thing that made her feel almost normal. The mist seemed to clutch at it, making its features even less recognizable, and it added a level of unreality to it. It made it seem as if it were fading away. "Can I tell you a secret?" it said suddenly, leaning in close one night and causing Liz to blink as the fog pattered against her face. "Sure," she said, glad for a break in conversation. Liz had been worried that she might run out of things to talk about, and then it would go away. She'd forgotten to be afraid of it, and was glad for the company and the attention this thing showed her after everyone else had gone to sleep. She missed her family and her children most of all, but having it here to talk to made it a little easier, a little more tolerable. "When you first noticed me, I had come to watch you." "Me?" Liz asked, surprised. "Why me?" "I noticed you when your boat came. You were just sitting there, sleeping, and I couldn't take my eyes off you. That's why I gave you the ring." Liz had been struggling with the conflicting nature of being both uncomfortable at the idea of this thing watching her and strangely flattered by its attention. When was the last time anyone had paid that sort of attention to her? Certainly not at home. Certainly not since she left college and started her descent into wedded bliss. She jumped a little when he mentioned the ring, having almost forgotten about it until right then. Sometimes she would go all day without thinking about it, and then it would suddenly catch on something, or the scratchy fibers would peel at her skin like steel wool, and she would remember that it was there. "You gave me the ring?" she asked, watching its head wobble oddly. "I did," and though it sounded like it wanted to say more, it was unsure how to proceed. "I don't know what to say," Liz said, knowing exactly what she wanted to say, but unsure if she could ask. The two sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the waves break on the beach as they stared at each other. "Why don't you ever sing any more?" Liz asked suddenly, causing the eyes to back up a little bit. They backed further away, getting closer to the tree line, but still unable to look away from Liz. Why don't you sing any more?" she asked again, and this time it sounded like an accusation. He was almost 30 feet away, but Liz still heard him when he whispered the secret he'd longed to keep hidden. "Because I don't want to hurt you, but I'm so hungry." As the sun came up, dispelling some of the fog, Liz was left with nothing but her confusion of mismatched feelings. Whatever he was, he managed to hold out for another 3 days. Liz didn't see him again until the third night, and that was when she heard the singing. Liz had thrown herself into any task she could find, trying to take her mind off of him. She wasn't exactly sure when he had gone from it to a him, but the transition made her wary. She'd been working to leave the island, wanting to return to the life she'd known, but now her tasks seemed so pointless. Maria had started lighting fires along the coast in an attempt to get the attention of a passing ship. Janet wanted to make a map of the island, something they could use to explore deeper for supplies. Ben wanted to find better shelter in case the weather changed. Gail wanted to try to find out if they could see the shipwreck at some point on the island, so they could get their bearings. Tracy just wanted to sit and work on her manuscript, and the others seemed content to just exist here until it was all over. It all seemed very trivial to Liz. Despite this, she threw herself into anything that came her way, whether it was scouring the island for resources, looking for somewhere to move the group, or just feeding fuel to the multiple signal fires. All the while, she could feel the eyes of her admirer as they followed her. She never saw him lurking in the mist, but she could sense his presence. He kept his distance, watching her from afar, and Liz was worried that she had offended him. She had suspected that he was the one luring people away, but she hadn't really understood the implication until he'd spelled them out for her. They would never find their fellow survivors, no matter how much they searched, and it was strange to feel so attached to someone who saw you as food. Angela had disappeared on the second day, but Liz doubted that her new friend had anything to do with it. Angela had done little else but weep for 2 days, the sea drinking her tears greedily. She wouldn't eat or drink, wouldn't come to camp no matter what the time, and when they woke up to find her stretch of beach had gone empty, Liz assumed that she had just wandered out into the sea. It might have been the kindest thing for her, but Ben had other ideas. With only 9 of them, Ben and Gale were now carrying clubs and accompanied anyone who left the camp to forage. They had appointed themselves as de facto guardians of the camp, and Ben seemed to have decided that he was their leader. He and Catherine argued often, but his patience for her seemed to be running thin. Kathy and Gregory had taken to sleeping close to Liz and her friends, and Kathy kept a protective arm around her son at all times. Tracy slept with her arms around her typewriter case, holding it like someone might a stuffed animal, but even she had moved closer to the group for protection. When Catherine came to join them on the 3rd night, they all slept in a shallow pile, like rabbits in a warren. Ben and Gale sat around the fire, blinking owlishly as they kept watch. But to Liz, it began to feel more like a prison camp than a group of survivors. Liz woke up on the 3rd night to the sound of singing. She found herself looking for those piercing red eyes amongst the fog, and found his shadowy body not too far away. Dark forms imposed themselves across her vision, and she watched them lumber into the trees before realizing what had actually woken her. It was only Ben by the fire now, Gale having left to go with her mysterious admirer, but now only Tracy's battered typewriter case was left to mark that she had existed at all. Some of the others were beginning to squirm, but instead of lingering, the music began to fade almost at once, making a couple of them jerk quietly as they sat down. One of them had been Janet, all 3 of the women sleeping close enough to each other for some semblance of protection, and as Liz settled back in, she found herself feeling torn about the absence of her mysterious new friend. Ben was upset the next day, enraged by the loss of Gale, and the others stuck close to camp that day. A light rain had blown in, and they seemed content to fix the boat tarp they had taken off the lifeboat to keep the worst of the rain off the fire. They huddled underneath it, shivering as the storm pattered around them. Ben stayed up late, his sleep utterly forgotten, but Liz's visitor didn't come back that night. She supposed he was full after eating so well the night before, but Liz still found her own sleep difficult. She was exhausted, unsure how much longer she could do this, and as she drifted off, she wondered who would be missing in the morning. When Janet's hand slid out of hers, Liz sat up in time to watch her walk out into the rain. The singing was getting farther away already, and when she looked at Ben, she found that he was snoring in the sand after tumbling off the log he'd been sitting on. Liz went after her friend before she could think better of it, and the rain was cold on her face as she moved out into the darkness. It didn't seem to affect Janet at all, and as Liz pulled at her to get her attention, it was like pulling on a stone. She strained at her, looping her legs around her as she tried to trip her up, but Janet's eyes were set as she made her way into the woods. Janet pulled her into the jungle, the two still struggling, and Liz could see those red eyes burning into the depths of her from the woods. "Stop it!" she yelled, tears mingling with the rain and sliding down her face. "Don't take her! She's my friend!" There was silence in the jungle, broken only by the falling of the rain as it hit the thick fronds of the trees. It was almost too loud for her to hear when he spoke, but it was just loud enough to reach her as he slipped into the wet blackness of the surrounding jungle. "Sorry, it's my nature," said the scorpion to the frog. She was left to ponder that as the rain soaked her to the bone, leaving her confused and apprehensive. Maria wrapped Liz in a hug when she came back, the camp awake and holding torches. They had spears too, even Gregory, and Ben pressed one into Liz's hand as Maria let her go. His eyes mistrusted her, but were resolved. He was clearly suspicious of her, but with only 6 of them remaining, he was forced to put his misgivings aside. "We're going after it," he said. And as her eyes grew wide, Ben smiled knowingly. "That's right. I've seen it too. I saw it tonight as you tried to drag your friend back, and I've seen it lurking around the camp more than once. I'm still not sure it's the thing that's taken people, but at this point, I don't much care. We're gonna find it. We're gonna kill it before it kills us." Liz wanted to deny him, wanted to scream at him, wanted to stab the spear into him and make him shut up, but instead, she fell in with Maria and let him lead her into the semi-darkness. She felt claustrophobic as they made their way into the jungle. Ben had no clue where he was going, but as the sun rose over the horizon, he kept them moving as their torches burned low and their clothes clung to them. They had set out with bellies full of fire, determined to find this thing. They crisscrossed the island, the sun dispelling the shadows as they moved, but they never seemed to find anything that would make a good hiding spot for anything bigger than a bird or a badger. The longer they searched, the more frantic Ben seemed to become. "Where are you?" he kept whispering, looking around frantically as he stalked the groves. "It has to be here somewhere." His need to find the creature seemed insatiable, but by noon, Ben was forced to admit that he had no idea what he was doing. The group was tired and hungry, their legs hurting and the fire in them now quenched by the mist as they turned back towards the campsite. Ben seemed completely demoralized. Catherine finally put a hand on his shoulder, reminding him that they were exhausted and needed to eat, and he was finally forced to turn around and head back to camp. They had covered the whole island, beach to beach, and found no sign of Janet or anyone else. As they trudged back, Ben wasn't the only one looking downtrodden. They all knew that come morning, they would likely be 5 instead of 6. Liz sat by the fire now, remembering the last few days with sobering clarity. Ben had been taken next. He had tried to stay up and keep watch, wanting to catch this thing so he could keep them safe from it. But in the end, he had succumbed and fallen asleep. They had all been so tired after trudging through the jungle, but when they woke up, he was already gone. Kathy was next, and Gregory's cries had brought the rest of them around the next morning. By then, the 4 of them had been frantic. No one wanted to be next, but it seemed inevitable. They were all tired, their meals growing smaller as their numbers dwindled, and they were utterly trapped by the island they now found themselves on. They couldn't fight him. They couldn't escape him. They were nothing but cattle, just waiting for the slaughter. Catherine went next, but by then, Liz already thought she knew what she had to do. When he returned the following night, she was waiting for him. He seemed confused when he found her awake, Maria and Gregory snoring around her, and when she put a finger to her lips, his nod made her stomach churn. "What will you do when they're all gone?" she asked, watching the fire dance between them as the mist made it hiss. He didn't answer her, his red eyes boring into her as he hunkered and watched. "You seem to be saving me for last. Do you hate me so much that you'd make me watch the people I care about disappear before it's my turn?" "Never," he blurted, and she shushed him as Gregory stirred. "I would never torture you like that. It's only that I can't bring myself to hurt you. I need to eat to survive, but I hate that it must come at the expense of you." They pondered this for a moment, the fire hissing and spitting like an angry cat. "What if I went with you now? Would you let these 2 go and take me?" He was silent, but his nod was all the answer she needed. "Lift the mist and let them go, and I'll go with you." He seemed startled. I can't promise your safety. It's hard for me to control my hunger, as you've seen. I'm not sure I could forgive myself if I hurt you. I'm sure you'll have no trouble calling more boats here, just like you did to ours, right?" The eyes looked away sheepishly, but he didn't bother to deny it. "How did you know?" "I guessed. Just like I guessed that this ring might be stopping your song from calling me away at night. Right?" He nodded again. "It won't protect you, though, if I decided to just gobble you up one day when I got hungry." "It's a chance I'll have to take," she said, getting up and walking towards him. The red eyes widened, but as she walked into the mist that surrounded him, the cold membrane encompassed her and accepted her. Liz felt conflicted as she watched the boat leave with Maria and Gregory. The sound of the deep whistle had brought the 2 around as the sun rode high in the morning, and Maria had called her name for quite a while before leaving with the boy. The ship had seen the messages on the beach, seen the smoke from their fires, and Liz had been afraid that Maria wouldn't go for a minute. As the boat grew smaller and smaller on the horizon, a part of Liz wished she was on it. Another part had already accepted that this was her new home, as certain as she was that she belonged with the man whose strange hand now clutched at hers. As strange as it sounded, this had been the trip she wanted. Her old life seemed so dull now. Harold and her children had already started to fade as she stood beside this strange creature. As she turned to look at him, she wondered if she would become like him one day. Maybe he had been like her once, before being discovered by something like him. Maybe he had left a life like hers behind, sacrificing everything because it felt right. Regardless, this was her home now, and as she turned to look at him, she felt complete in a way that she had never felt before. Tea is at that perfect temperature for drinking, and I think it might be time for me to sign off for another day. I do hope you've enjoyed our comfy horror today, and I hope you'll come back again for many, many more. I'm certainly not going anywhere, and I hope you aren't either. So, till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.